So I'm going to tell you a story of a fridge magnet. It might sound boring, but let me describe. It's a really shitty fridge magnet too. So let me describe this shitty fridge magnet before I get into the story of how the fridge magnet came to be. So the picture that from which this fridge magnet was made was shot from an open window, and it looks inside a small, cozy wooden outhouse. And in this wooden outhouse, there's a couple of the obligatory, deer heads mounted on one wall. A few of the walls have framed pictures of people in various stages of drunken revelry. And there are two wingback chairs on the two sides of the entrance. And opposite this, there is a guy with his pants around his ankles, wearing a flaming orange Ray-Ban pair of sunglasses and flashing a wide smile. And he's sitting on the toilet, right? Oh, sorry, thank you for the reminder. And he's sitting on the toilet. And that's the picture. And obviously you have guessed that guy is me. And I'm now going to tell you how that picture was taken. Right? In another life, I found myself camping with a large group of people in Appalachian, West Virginia. How I came to do that is a story for another day. But let's just start there. Like, I was camping with this big group of people in Appalachian, West Virginia. And it so happened that that camping trip coincided with a big party, and 100 or so people were driving in from all over the country and from nearby towns. And I want to maybe give you some sense of context of this place throughout the story. So let me just describe where the campgrounds, basically. Right, the campgrounds was in a large piece of property owned by this guy called Terry, who, if you ever seen pictures of mall Santa Claus, I mean, he was that guy, right? Except you have to understand his Appalachian accent, which is an altogether different language I might even add, even though it's called English. And to give you a sense of the beauty of this place, just picture yourself in a valley or hollow, as the locals would call it there, with a lazy creek meandering its way through the valley. You're standing by this creek, and you look all around you, and you're in the spur of the Appalachian Mountains with tall, towering mountains all around you. Maybe they're imposing hills. After having seen the Alps, I would call them imposing hills, right? So you're surrounded by these imposing hills, all clad in verdant green foliage, still fresh from a wet spring. Like, it was really beautiful. And all these people drove in, set up camp, and these were professional campers. I was really impressed with their setups, right? They had multi-room tents, big air beds with pumps that needed to be hooked up to a car, huge grills, smokers. I mean, they came like professional campers. And so all of them descended into this little valley, Terry's Valley, for this party, and I happened to be at the right place at the right time. And so before I move on to the day of the photograph, let me just sort of describe the day prior, because it sets up the photograph. And this day of this party had a theme: food, alcohol, psychedelics, mostly weed, but psychedelics, and music. So food, I mean, there was enough food to feed a few impoverished countries. People brought huge amounts of food, cooked it, set it out in a pavilion. Terry and his family brought out huge quantities of, think of whatever you want, like ribs, beef, pork, whatever it is. every few hours to keep the 100 or so people fed. Alcohol, I mean, it was a party in the Appalachian Mountains, right? Till to date, I have never had a better, what do they call it when they brew their own alcohol in the...
Moonshine. Moonshine.
Moonshine, that's it. I've never had better peach moonshine in my life. It was a leap of faith. I did not know it could be toilet wipe for all I know. I had to take a leap of faith, but it was the best peach moonshine I have ever had. And everybody, brought their own drinks. There was beer flowing like the creek. It was awash with alcohol. But one had to understand this was a marathon, not a sprint. You go too hard, much like the Oktoberfest, I guess, right? Like you go too hard, just face plant, and that'll be the end of your party. So you sort of nursed your blood alcohol level, got high a little bit, and make it through the day. And so people ate, drank, and congregated in small groups around music. Right? And they were incredibly talented musicians. This was a rare, I'm really interested in music. I can't play for nuts and I can't sing for nuts, but this was a really good, I was thrilled to meeting so many incredibly talented musicians, nameless ones, who you'll never find on any CD or an album or on Spotify, of all persuasions, right? And they were all united in small groups with their love for Americana, folk music, the blues, and Southern rock mostly. And they could play, they could play. And so the day went by with eating, drinking, playing music, taking a nap from the afternoon sun, and so on. I'm sorry, I just saw your rather young son.
Too late.
Yes, too late. He might have questions for you later. So, and as the day eased into the night, a bunch of people got busy splitting huge oak logs, and they put up a huge fire in the fire pit. This thing was massive. And I have fond memories of, and this was in late May, so the nights, especially in the mountains, still get quite cold. So I have fond memories of warming my butt against the fire, hanging out with a bunch of other people, fellow butt warmers, sharing drinks and stories. And at this point, conversation was just mostly jokes, right? Like you were buzzed after a whole day of drinking and eating. And the same musicians who sort of were in acoustic mode during the day, they all plugged in their instruments and they had a little stage set up, and they put on a really fantastic rock show. Much like the same music styles I mentioned, Southern rock was mostly it, classic rock from the 70s to the 90s, and they killed it, really, they were really good. And like most concerts, they have a little playlist and they modulate their energy, and it goes up to a high, and then they took a break, right? And the music got louder, more alcohol was consumed, special cookies passed around, whatever, it got really good, and they took a break. And in this break, I only have 2 minutes, maybe got to a halfway point. Let's see. I'll come back for an encore. But sorry, where was I? Yes, in this break, Terry and his family rolled out cannons on the valley floor. It so turned out that they had a passion for buying cannons used in the Civil War. So they rolled out these big cannons that they had refurbished, and they, for the next 20-30 minutes, laid out a volley of deafening fire into the hills. There's something to be said about the freedom of being able to own 5-6 cannons and having the freedom to fire it in your backyard. He owned all the land around him where he was firing it, and and be perfectly safe in your right to do so. But it was fun. It was great to actually see that as a pet project. Like, yeah, I fire cannons. I'm going to bring on 5 cannons out and fire them out into the hills because I can. Then came the fireworks. And I mean, this likely would have been the spiritual high point for people powered by various substances, right? Like they had a cannon show and a beautiful fireworks show. And then I'm going to fast forward some of the story. The night ended, and we'll move to the next morning. This is the day of the photograph. And if anyone has ever camped here before, you know that you wake up at the crack of dawn to use the outhouse, because once people get in there, it takes a life of its own that you do not want a part of. So I went to bed with this strategy in mind, woke up the next day, ran to this wooden outhouse that I mentioned before. I don't think I was ready for what I saw there. I'll be done in 2 minutes. Can I take 2 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just briefly describe the scene that I ran into when I went to this outhouse. So in my little introduction, what the little detail I left out was the 2 wingback chairs were on one side of the outhouse, facing that a couple of feet away. Like, if I was sitting in a chair right across by the steps, this big wooden plank, with 2 toilet seats. Before you're wondering, there was no barrier, there was nothing to prevent you from enjoying the company of your fellow toilet user. And they were right next to each other. You could sit on one and hug the person sitting on the other. It was that close. And there were chairs set out in the outhouse. And when I went there, I saw these 2 women sitting on the toilet seats. And after a day of the gluttony that I described, it was not a quiet experience, right? They were going about their business with a certain enthusiasm. And opposite these 2 women were 2 men sitting on the 2 wingback chairs. And the 4 of them were having a conversation completely oblivious to their combined shitting experience. Right? It was a bizarre, out-of-the-world scene. And let me introduce you to a value I hold dear to my own identity. I don't poop in a group. It's not a team building exercise, it's not camaraderie, like, you shit alone, right? So, I had a moment where I was like, I'm not going in there, but how do I wait for this outhouse to clear? And one of these women finished her business, stood up, got dressed, and left like it was nothing. And in my moment of hesitation, because there were still 3 others in there, and I wanted to use it alone, there was another man who walked past me into the outhouse. And since the other 2 men were obviously waiting their turn, this one guy got up, and this gets grosser, right? He walks up next to this lady still sitting on the toilet seat, and he takes a piss. He urinates, and he's like in the personal space of this lady, but nobody gives a shit. Unintended. Right? Nobody gives a shit. Unintended. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So by this time, a couple of others came by, and I was determined to get in there. So I asked them, hey, I'm not comfortable with what's going on in there. So do you mind holding the line? Like, I want you to guard this door like you've never guarded anything in your life. I'll wait for the 3-4 people in there to get out, and I'm going to go in there, and you're going to stop anyone from entering. These guys were pretty good-natured. They made me the butt end of their jokes, laughing at my city boy upbringing. But they were true. Once the outhouse emptied, I went in, and this outhouse had no windows, no doors, right? You just stood outside. So, and I had to unburden myself from the gluttony of the previous day, but I did so at least relatively alone, with everybody looking in. And once I got in, everyone took out their phones and took photos. And that's the story of how I made shitting in public look cool.